So, welcome back to Silmarillion Total War and to another battle replay and another siege battle replay actually, because, well, this is actually a map that we've seen before, interestingly enough, on Silmarillion Total War, albeit we're going to be seeing it in a completely different context this time, because last time we didn't actually get to see the settlement and its sort of makeshift minor walls on the outside and the interior of the settlement here, where you can retreat over the bridge to this little island used at all last time. Previously, we fought along this river over here and it was a more even battle, it was a 2v2, whereas this is going to be a siege battle between 3 attackers and 2 defenders. So we're going to be having on the defence the house of FINARFIN, I should say. Fingolfin not quite in the game just yet, but will be, and the elves of Assyrian, and then on the attack we have 2 armies full of Sauron's minions in the dominion of Tol in Gowerhoth, and I believe actually they have managed to enslave one of the elven factions over here, because the House of Feanor have turned to the dark side, as we can see. So Sauron, having already defeated one of the elven powerhouses, is now going to move on to yet another elven stronghold and try and bring it to heel. But we'll go through the attackers first of all, because that's how we usually do these things. But a quick note on the map as well, like as far as defending this settlement goes, there are only a few ways into the settlement because of these sort of grass banks guarding it all from the outside, so there will be a few choke points that the defenders can make use of. But I would also say that it's not the easiest settlement to defend. If you do let the attackers in, there's a lot of space that the numbers, particularly from the 2 Orcish armies, are going to be able to use to their advantage, so I would give a distinct advantage to the attackers in this particular situation. But having said that, the defensive position, if used wisely, should be enough to give the defenders a good fighting chance of taking on all of the Orcish numbers, combined of course with the heavier units from the House of Feanor. But we shall start off with Windy Pops over here, who's going to be playing as the Dominion of Tol in Gowerhoth, who's got some Gijak Skaras chosen on the front line, which are overall the heaviest unit of Dominion infantry that they can bring, which is a good choice in an offensive siege like this, certainly in comparison to the other Orcish faction, Angband. The Dominion army is significantly less armoured, but they do still have numbers on their side, and in certain cases, such as with the Gijak Skaras chosen, their infantry is still durable enough to be very, very useful in a siege, and of course spears can obviously get into formation and try to push through enemy lines as well, which will be very, very useful. I'm sure you can hear the dog barking once again. We have some Gijak Skaras Wolf Guard as well, which is effectively the line infantry variant of the Chosen. You know, obviously they have maces, which makes them AP as well. Not going to be terribly useful, I would suggest, against the Green Elves, which Windy is going to be facing off against on this side, but they are still the heaviest unit of line infantry bloody hell, the dog can be so annoying and loud sometimes. But yeah, the heaviest unit of line infantry that the Dominion have at their disposal, so it's not too surprising to see Windy bring a few units of them. Just in behind, we can see we have the Hishtbukraz Howlers, which I believe this is the locked morale unit that they have. So it's a dual-wielding unit, so they have a decent amount of damage. They have dual-wielding units have a decent amount of defensive skill as well, all things considered. Hold on a moment. Now then, as I was saying, dual-wielding units do actually have a decent amount of defensive skill, generally speaking, but obviously the main problem with the Hishtbukraz Howlers is obviously going to be they're very vulnerable to arrow fire, which is going to be a problem against the elven factions, of course. But decent damage and decent melee defense from these units will help them in melee against the elves, certainly, but their main draw will, of course, be the fact that they're locked morale, so you can get them into melee and they will stand and fight until the last man, which is very important in this sort of situation, because one of the things you can obviously use against the orcs, no matter what submod you're in really, is the fact that their morale, generally speaking, is going to be on the lower side of things. And the Hishtbukraz Howlers just being in the army is going to make them a little bit more difficult to get rid of, which of course means that the elves won't be able to ration out their manpower in quite the same way as they would maybe like. So a good choice for the army, I would suggest. We also have the Scarahai Longfangs, which are the more affordable units of line infantry that the Dominion have at their disposal. They have their axes, so that gives them a little bit more in terms of their base damage, at the cost of even more of their survivability. So certainly against the elven infantry they're going to be facing off against, they won't be able to keep themselves alive all that well, but they will be able to do a little bit of extra damage. And also axe units like this, they do actually have a pretty decent charge. They're not AP, but they do have a decent charge bonus, so if they can charge into an elven defensive line, they should be set up to do some pretty decent damage, at least off the bat. Backing them up, we have some Scarahai Blood Drinkers, so that's even more AP as well, albeit of course they have an even better charge bonus and even more base attack, but of course once again their survivability is going to be brought into question, and they are going up against the Green Elves of Assyrian, so armour is not really something they prioritise, so the AP is going to be largely wasted, I would suggest, from the Scarahai Blood Drinkers, but the base damage could still be very useful. They just need to steer clear of those elven bows. Back here we have some Scarahide Trappers, which they're the hand-thrown projectile unit that the Dominion have at their disposal, at least one of the cheaper variants. Of course, they do have quite a few of those, actually, the Dominion, but most of the higher tier ones have a little bit more of a fire sorcery angle to them, whereas the Scarahide Trappers, they're just sort of throwing whatever they can bring to hand at the enemy. But this is still going to be useful because hand-thrown projectile units like this can still be very damaging if you can get them into the right position. But of course they will be one of the main targets, I believe, that the Elven Archers will be going after, alongside stuff like the Hishtbuk-Kraz Howlers and the Scarahide Blood Drinkers over here. We have the Hishtbuk-Kraz Ash Priests in here as well, a unit which I was actually very interested to see in the last battle we saw from Silmarillion, and they didn't disappoint. They do have sort of fire sorceries that they throw from their hands as well, which obviously they're going to deal a lot more damage. They're also multiple HP, one of the few units that are, and also they pull out those big axes in melee which give them a lot of damage, and of course AP. Once again, AP not so useful against the Green Elves, but even so it's still going to be useful because they're multiple HP, so they'll still be able to deal out their damage. The problem they have, of course, is, as with most other multiple HP units, they're a very small unit, all things considered. They're much more of a supporting unit. Obviously, on their own, they'll easily be singled out by Elven Archers, and that is going to be their primary weakness here. Even with those wooden shields they have, they still need to steer well clear of Assyrian's very packed Archer roster, but still very useful in this situation. And also back here we have some Hishtbuk-Kraz Hunters as well, so just some basic Orcish Archers to try and at least contest the range game, which is always going to be important. Interestingly enough, there might be some units hidden in the trees in this case, but in a siege battle like this, one of the Dominion's main strengths, obviously, in general, is their wargs, but in a siege battle, obviously, they become a little bit more difficult to use, so the Dominion has to get a little bit more creative, having to use some of their sort of more savage units, perhaps, to try and give themselves a bit of an advantage. Over here we can see the second Dominion army, played by Waffles. He has got some Hishtbuk-Kraz Howlers on the front line as well, and this is one of the units which, again, just like I said with Windy's army, I would hope that they would perform quite well in this situation, because the locked morale can be a real boon in a situation like this. Just in behind, we have the Mangonel as well, so obviously a nice piece of artillery. This is also on loan in many ways from Angband, because they do have some iron-shod infantry that is manning it, so they actually have some decent armour, better armour than most of the Dominion roster in general, to be honest with you. But the Mangonel, of course, as a piece of siege equipment, you're obviously going to be looking at it to deal a lot of damage. Make sure that the enemy can't just sit comfortably on their positions and use their archers and their defensive infantry. Give them something to think about, at least, by flinging some of those explosive barrels at them. More Hishtbuk-Kraz Howlers back here. We have some Scarahide Longfangs once again, so the more basic unit of line infantry. Going to be interesting to see how they perform. The Dominion in general, to be honest with you, because in this situation I feel as though, you know, the more lightweight nature of the Dominion army makes them a little bit more difficult to play in this situation than Angband. But they still have tools. You just got to be a little bit more careful, especially considering most of their sort of higher damage units, such as the Scarahide Blood Drinkers back here, do tend to be more vulnerable to arrows, which of course both the House of Finarfin and Assyrian have in droves. Back here we have some of the heavier units from the Dominion once again, the Gijak Skaraz Chosen. Again, a good choice, I think. Their spears may not deal as much damage to Elven units as maybe would be ideal for the Dominion armies, but just their heavier nature is going to be important here when pushing into the later stages of this fight, I think, as, of course, will the Gijak Skaraz Wolfguard. The AP will be a little bit more useful against Finarfin, to be fair, than against the Green Elves for Syrian. And back here, once again, more Hishtbuk-Kraz Ash Priests, so very, very similar armies overall, albeit it seems as though Windy brought a bit more infantry, and Waffles brought that artillery piece. Now, there's not a lot of this army over here that we can see from King of the North. We can only see the Otorn Maitimo, which of course are the bodyguard unit for the Elven infantry over here for the House of Feanor. Very, very strong, of course. The House of Feanor have by far the heaviest armour on the field today, which will be very useful actually, especially in comparison to the Dominion armies they're attacking alongside, and also a catapult with an Elven artillery crew here. Obviously we can't see anything else. It'll be interesting to see if the House of Feanor have brought some cavalry, because it doesn't look as though the Dominion have brought any wargs, but yeah, interesting to note what Feanor have as they move forward, to be honest. Now we shall move on to the defenders, starting off with the player who sent me this battle replay. We have Agalar Galudithon, who's playing as the House of Finarfin. He's got some marksmen of Nargothrond over here, so some of the slightly heavier units for the House of Finarfin are the Nargothrond units. And obviously the archers in this particular situation are going to be one thing the defenders will be able to really leverage against the attackers, especially the Dominion armies, but it's true of the House of Feanor as well, just because they have to move into the jaws of this defence, and the marksmen of Nargothrond should be able to fill their boots in terms of kills. Back here, are they up here? I think they are. Yes, we do have some units up here on this sort of higher ground, so interesting to see the little nooks and crannies of this map being utilised. So we have more marksmen of Nargothrond down here on the lower ground. So you can see there are sort of several ways into the settlement that can be utilised, not just the 3 or 4 roads in, I think, on the outside of things. But as I sort of escape the trees, we can see hiding over here we have the defenders of Talath Dirnan, or Dirnan. They are, of course, the more basic unit of spears that the House of FINARFIN have at their disposal. Down over here we have some swordsmen of Talath Dirnan, who are of course swordsmen combined with javelins, quite similar to the Mythlonda Marines over in Reforged, at least in terms of their hybrid nature. We have a detachment of swordsmen of Talath Dirnan as well, so when you're on the defence, bringing detachments is a good way to save money and try to fill out your army a little bit more, so very, very useful there. We have some Wardens of Nargothrond, so some of the heavier spears, which are of course going to be making up the bulk of these defences on the outside. We have some Archers of Talath Dirnan, so Talath Dirnan units are sort of the backbone of a FINARFIN army, and then the Nargothrond units and the higher tier units are going to be used to sort of the quality core. So it'll be interesting to see how they play off against one another. The only pike, or out-and-out pike unit in the game at the moment, the Bridge Wards of Nargothrond, are going to be a very, very important unit for the defenders. If they can get them into position without taking any sort of ranged fire, particularly from something like the Hishbukraz Ash Priests or any of the artillery, they could be an insurmountable obstacle for the attackers to overcome. So the attackers do need to be careful of FINARFIN's pikes. We have the Arqueni Mormagilwa. So there we can see the general with the black sword. I can't remember his name off the top of my head, but I was told it. Really, really nice looking unit, I have to say this, and obviously in terms of quality they are the deadliest unit of infantry that the House of FINARFIN have at their disposal. So big things expected of them, even against the House of Feanor's more heavily armoured infantry. I'd expect them to do the business, quite frankly. And then over here, facing off against the Dominion's forces, we have some scouts of Taura and Faroth. So they're obviously archers, combined with those two-handed spears, making them obviously quite versatile, but in this situation I can't imagine the spears will be all that important, but you never know. Feanor might have brought some cavalry. Some Wardens of Nargothrond once again. We have some more Swordsmen of Talath Dirnan. We have some more Wardens of Nargothrond, some more Bridge Wards, some Sartor Findarata, which are the highest tier of spear that the House of FINARFIN have at their disposal. Very heavy spearmen, of course. Very difficult to break down. We have some more Swordsmen of Talath Dirnan. And then finally, at least from what we can see, the Archers of Talath Dirnan over here. Of course, they have to face against 2 attacking forces, so it's all to do for the House of FINARFIN, whereas the Syrians have sort of bunched up entirely against the Dominion army over here. I do feel as though Uraki over here should, or Uraki? Well, regardless, I do feel as though he needs to spread out his army and needs to support his ally a little bit more. He can't afford to just sort of guard this one choke point against one Dominion army if his ally is getting overrun from 2 sides, but we'll see what he decides to do as the battle goes on. Some Erfin and Tower, of course, very nice, heavier archers by Assyrian standards, combined with two-handed axemen, so that should be a very nice dual-purpose unit as the battle goes on. We have some Scouts of Gellion hidden alongside the Spear Host of Rathloriel. The Spear Host of Rathloriel, of course, pretty much a central unit for the Elves of Assyrian, because they don't have what you would call a standard unit of line infantry. They don't really have swordsmen as such that are as cheap as the Spear Host of Rathloriel. So you will tend to see Assyrian go for a lot more spears in general than line infantry, because their line infantry tends to be pretty expensive. Scouts of Gellion over here, more Spear Host, and speaking of expensive line infantry, here they are, the Maithern and Tol Galen, which are very expensive but very worthwhile because they're a very strong unit of line infantry with maces, so it gives them an AP edge as well. Once again, AP is not really the most useful thing to bring against the Dominion, to be honest with you, but it will at least be useful against the Gijak Skaraz infantry units, I suppose. The Ents as well. You'll see the Ents for Assyrian quite a lot, purely because they do need a little bit of muscle in their army, I think, to make up for their more lightweight nature, and the Ents obviously provide that very, very easily. Erfin and Tower, once again, 2 units. One is a unit, one is a detachment, so half strength over there, and then there's a few units up on this hill over here, and this might actually be another way into the settlement over here, so that should be something which Windy should be looking at exploiting if it is. Scouts of Gellion, Spear Host of Rathloriel, and then there's another unit up here as well, some more Spear Host of Gellion, which I believe are the two-handed spear unit which the Elves of Assyrian have at their disposal, which is not so much a pike unit, but it can perform in similar ways at the very least. But without further ado, let's begin. So I'm going to be interested to see how the defenders approach this, because to be honest with you, the one problem I can see immediately is the fact that the House of FINARFIN is having to deal with far more in terms of choke points and ways into the settlement than their ally Assyrian, and they're having to deal with 2 attacking armies as well. 1 Dominion force coming right up the pipe, and then the House of Feanor's army, which is obviously going to swing out wide over here and start laying siege to this area over here as well. So it'll be interesting to see how that works. I'm also interested to see if the defenders decide to pull back and try to defend this central island over here. Obviously it does narrow it down to just the 1 choke point, but I think they're going to want to try and get use out of their outer layer first and foremost. And actually, while this is happening, we can actually get a closer look at what the House of Feanor have brought. So some defenders of Aglon, which is good to see, with the armour upgrades as well, so they're going to be very, very effective on the front line with their base damage. Some upgraded footmen of Amras as well, so going for a more quality-focused approach here, Feanor, with upgrading all of their better infantry units. Some shield bearers of Helavorn as well, just to pad out their army a little bit more in terms of numbers. And obviously some rangers of Helavorn, some stalkers of Thargelion as well, and several units of archers of Amrod as well. I probably would have been more tempted to put the armour upgrades on the elven archers, to be honest with you, more so than the infantry. Because that will obviously give you something which will far more easily skirmish with the forces you're going up against. And actually as well, some two-handed spears combined with archers as well in the huntsmen of Thargelion. Obviously their armour is significantly lower than that of the elves they're facing, or fighting alongside in this case, but even so, certainly a smaller but more quality-focused army this from the House of Feanor, but that should offset the more numbers-focused and perhaps more lightweight approach that the Dominion of Tolin Gaurahoth are having to engage in. Let's see though, slowly but surely making their way forward. Hishtbukkra's hunters leading the way, so obviously the light orcish archers are going to have to be the first ones to engage with the defences. They, certainly with the terrain disadvantage they have, and obviously the very light armour that they're going to be marching into battle with, they're going to be losing fairly heavily, whether it's against the more damage-focused elves with Syrian's archers, or if it's going up against the slightly tankier archers from the House of FINARFIN. They obviously won't be up to too much, but the calm before the storm certainly here, as we can see the archers of Talath Dianin taking up a good position up here on the higher ground. They're going to be able to get some good shots on the Dominion army as they approach, and to be honest with you, this is something that the attackers are just going to have to try and take on the chin. The one thing I would say is it might actually be worth Windy's time over here, just waiting a little bit longer. He does actually have some wargs. I believe these are the lighter wargs. These lighter wargs I believe they have AP, whereas the heavier wargs actually don't, but they're obviously substantially less survivable, these guys. So the Laugskaraz Zat Gulaklab, which is another real mouthful, but it's good to have at least some cavalry when you're on the attack, because if you do see a little bit of a gap, you can get in there and start to wreak havoc in the enemy's backlines. But of course, the lighter wargs like this especially will have their work cut out getting into a position where they can do that without getting showered by archers, especially considering how hard the elves of Assyrian have banked up against this particular choke point as well. And like I was saying, I think it might be worth Windy's time to actually just not attack for the time being. Let his 2 allies go to town on the House of FINARFIN, wait until the elves of Assyrian see the error of their ways and then have to send over support and then attack. I think that would be the better way to go about things, but we shall see if that is how they decide to go about their business. Yeah, it's going to be interesting here. I think this battle is actually going to be decided, at least the way the wind will blow in this battle, I think will be decided fairly quickly. Because if the attackers all come forward and all attack all at once, I feel as though the Elven Archers on the defence could do enough damage quickly enough to send this battle in their favour. I think Windy's army in particular is going to be in trouble if he decides to attack early, to be honest with you. It's one of those situations where I actually do recommend a little bit of caution from the attackers. Over on these 2 sides, though, I would suggest that Waffles' Dominion army and the Feanor army under the command of King of the North should both attack with everything they have all at once, because Finarfin's army is having to split between the 2 of them, and there's no way will they be able to survive against such an onslaught without any sort of support from Assyrian bringing some units over. Slowly but surely, in fact I think it's about time I made a little bit of a cut here, because I have to say I think the attackers are dragging their heels a little bit. Okay, so we finally have the beginning of the action here, and interestingly enough it is from Windy's army, which I think reflects kind of poorly on his 2 allies, to be honest with you, if he's the one that's attacking first when he has by far the most banked up on his choke points over here. Waffles in particular has not moved yet, which is a little bit disappointing. But the Hishbut-Kraz hunters are going to be moving in now. Obviously, the Elves of Sirian, being what they are, have a huge amount of archers up on the walls, including scouts of Gellion, Erfin and Tau. The Randirim and Tol Galen are up here as well, so the unit of rangers is going to be on hand, which is why the Dominion army over on this side under Windy's command really doesn't want to blob up in these choke points, because those rangers will tear right through the slightly more lightly armoured Dominion forces. But he is at least trying to poke and prod to get a reaction from Uraki's Assyrian army, and to be fair, Assyrian have sent over a couple of units in support of their ally now. Over here we have some spear hosts of Rath Loriel and something else as well. We have some Erfin and Tau, which is good to see, although we might get the beginnings of some action now, as the defenders of Talath Dianin have been exposed, and the Stalkers of Thargelion, as well as the archers from Thargelion as well, are able to get some good value here as they get the initial shots off. I think maybe Agalar was hoping to ambush his opponent by hiding some units in the trees, but it didn't really work out that way, and now these spears are a little bit isolated, to be honest with you, trying to get in behind the walls over here, forcing the House of Feanor into moving forward a little bit more. So these cheap javelins, or at least cheaper javelins from the House of Feanor, doing a good job here, getting a little bit of value early on. You can see here the spears are now going to charge forward. I think the javelins should be able to get one volley off before they run away though. Oh no, the javelins took quite a while to set up there. They will at least get one volley off point blank, but they will also be forced into a melee engagement, which is not really what they want, to be honest with you. They probably want to retreat and get out of there, because obviously javelins of this nature are not going to be the best in melee. The footmen of Amras that are upgraded, however, should be able to defeat the defenders of Talath Dianin relatively easily, of course. You know, weapon type advantage, swordsmen against spearmen here. Swordsmen are much better against infantry. But also just the tier of unit that they are, especially with the armour upgrade. The defenders of Talath Dianin are a little bit more basic in terms of what they offer. Warns of Nargothrond moving forward. We also see down here, however, Rangers of Halavorn getting into position, trying to use their javelins as well. They are the slightly higher tiered javelin in compared to the Stalkers. Trying to throw directly up the hill. The problem is the angle isn't really on their side, so they're not really hitting the target on any of these archers, really. You can also see over here the archers of Amrod are getting into a good position. And I wonder what they're fighting, or firing at. The bridge wards? No, it looks like they're firing against these swordsmen of Talath Dianin up here on the hillside. It's only a detachment of swordsmen, but even so, they're just getting shot at with no real response from the House of Finarfin so far. Still, good to see some good action going on over here. Meanwhile, over on the other side, still very much skirmish focus, which, from Windy's perspective, is completely unavoidable, to be honest with you. Like, if he moves in droves, then all of the Elven archers will be activated, and then his army will take massive losses. Hishbut-Kraz hunters are going to be doing their best to try and at least do some damage to the Elven skirmish line, but to be honest with you, very, very limited success so far. The Scouts of Galleon are a little bit more vulnerable to this sort of warfare because they have very light armour, but in terms of the damage, in terms of the terrain advantage as well, the Hishbut-Kraz hunters are just going to be in massive, massive trouble when it comes to trying to skirmish with Assyrian's more defensive position. Waffles and his central Dominion army honestly needs to move forward now, because his allies aren't going to be making too much in the way of progress. But he possibly could, and he could force the issue a little bit more, so he needs to be a little bit more proactive, in my opinion. Swordsmen of Talath Dianin now being added to the front line alongside the spearmen, but in response to that we also have the shield bearers of Halavorn coming in from the House of Feanor as well. So far, relatively even as the fight goes, but I do still think that the upgraded footmen of Amras should give the attackers a little bit of an advantage as the battle goes along. The human units that are in here at the very least will still take some fairly hefty losses, and actually the Stalkers of Thargelion weren't actually able to get out of there before being largely killed off, so that could be construed as a bit of a victory for the House of Finarfin, because I feel as though they could have wriggled away a little bit more than they ended up doing. You can see that some of the archers of Amrod here took some fairly hefty losses at the hands of the marksmen of Nargothrond over here, and now they're going to move to try and get out of the way of those arrows. The marksmen of Nargothrond taking some hits from the huntsmen of Thargelion up on the hill over there. So the House of Feanor have definitely done the most to make the defenders feel uncomfortable so far. You can see some more footmen of Amras are now moving forward from the House of Feanor. But yeah, I think it is a bit of a tricky situation for the House of Finarfin over here, because I feel as though already, well, there are the split shot arrows, which are of course absolutely deadly, especially to more lightly armoured targets like the huntsman over there. But it is a fairly difficult situation to be in, I think, for the House of Finarfin. not the easiest position to defend, to be honest with you, especially after surrendering this slightly higher piece of terrain to the House of Feanor without a fight. Could be a little bit more difficult over here. Meanwhile, the Dominion forces moving forward, the Hishbuk-Krau's hunters trying to get into position. The Archers of Talath Dirnin will, of course, respond in kind. Hishbuk-Krau's Howlers trying to move forward as well. But it'll be interesting to see how much they're really going to commit forward here, the Dominion. The Howlers are going to be trying to charge in, it looks like, which is an interesting choice. I think maybe they do need a little bit of support. They will fight until the end, but I feel as though a bit of support certainly wouldn't go amiss for them, and the rest of the Dominion army is still a little bit too far away for my liking. I don't really think Waffles is going to achieve anything by doing this. Like, the Hishbuk-Krau's Howlers will at least fight to the bitter end, but are they really going to make that much of an impact on the Elven defenders that are here? I don't think they will. They need the rest of the infantry here if they're going to make any sort of impact here, and unfortunately I think this could be seen as a bit of a waste from Waffles. We'll see, I could be proven wrong, but I still feel as though with the Wardens of Nargothrond, the heavier unit of Elven Spears, should be relatively comfortable at holding the line against these more lightly armoured Orcs, even if they do have decent attack. The real kicker is going to be if the Elven Archers manage to start shooting into the side, because then they will drop like flies. It doesn't matter if you've got lock morale then, you'll die just as quickly as you break. The Orcish Archers trying to do some damage to the Marksmen of Nargothrond up on the hill over there. We do have some more Hishbuk-Krau's Howlers moving forward now. In come the Bridge Wards of Nargothrond, which is a fairly bold move to put them into view of the Orcish Archers, but the Swordsmen of Talath Dirnin are over here as well. Over here. We can see that the Dominion army under the command of Windy is now moving forward with some of the heavier units actually, so this is again a pretty bold move, I would suggest. This could backfire pretty horribly for him, but I feel as though he's taken the decision here to be a bit more aggressive, which I appreciate honestly, because of all of the attacking armies he probably had the most license to be far more cautious, considering he had pretty much the entirety of one high quality defending army to deal with. And that defending army was Assyrian, who has all of the archery tools necessary to make the army of the Dominion feel very, very uncomfortable indeed. In come the Scarahai Trappers as well, so I think the fate of Windy's army will be decided relatively quickly here. But the Scouts of Galleon are already firing, so you can see here he's shooting into the Gijak Scarah's Wolfguard. Just look at the bodies of the Orcs here littered across the battlefield. Oof. Yeah, I feel as though Windy's probably regretting his decision to be as aggressive as he was, to be honest with you, as he's moving in to the very well set up Elven Crossfire over here. But we shall see if his allies are able to make anything stick. More Hishbuk-Krau's Howlers, but defeat seems certain. The quality of the elves is simply going to be too much. Oof. In come the split shot arrows as well, which are going to be absolutely ideal against something like the Hishbuk-Krau's Howlers. But over here we can also see that the House of Feanor are moving in. The Archers of Talath Dirnin shooting from on high. The Wardens of Nargothrond, heavier spears alongside the Bridge Wards of Nargothrond, going to be able to hold these individual units in place relatively easily and allow the FINARFIN Archers to go about their grisly work. Archers of Nargothrond over there, but it was over here really that the attackers have had the most joy so far, but even then they don't really have much to show for that. They've inflicted some hefty losses on the FINARFIN army, but overall they haven't actually gained any significant ground. And there are still Wardens and Defenders that are still alive from that. Footmen of Amras. Yeah, Feanor, I think the attackers need to be a little bit more decisive, I think. They're a little bit too wishy-washy at the moment with their approach, and the defenders are reaping the benefits, honestly, because with this sort of pick-and-mix approach that they're taking, sort of sending in individual bits, they're able to focus them down with archers before they sort of are able to get into the front line, and that obviously drastically takes away from their effectiveness. Archers of Amrod moving forward. Of course, Elven Archers are good in melee, but they're already so depleted that they're not going to make the difference on the front line here, especially not against a phalanx like this. Bridge Wards and Wardens here on the front line doing a good job. Let's go and see what fate awaits Windy's army as the Scarahai Trappers are in here. What have we got going on over here? Gijak Scarah's chosen. Some Scarahai Longfangs moving forward. I mean, that is the saving grace for the two Dominion armies at the very least. They do have a lot of disposable manpower that they can afford to lose, and they can only really hope that they run out of ammunition before it becomes too much of a problem. Although, with the amount of archers that Assyrian often bring, getting them to run out of ammunition is easier said than done. But at the very least, I would say that Windy has managed to get into melee up here without taking too many losses. The Hishbukraz Howlers, however, are still fighting uphill into Elven Spearmen that have decent melee defense in the Spear host of Rathloriel. So they're going to need more support. The Scarahai Longfangs, that would really be my only criticism of Windy's approach here, is that he needed to send up a little bit more support rather than individual units. Gijak Scarah's Wolfguard are over here as well, though, the heavier unit of infantry. And they should be enough to do some decent damage to the Scouts of Galleon here, although the lower base attack in favour of AP is not going to help them here. Their heavier nature should be enough to actually kill them off. And Assyrian probably needs to send over some reinforcements over here, to be honest with you, because the Scarahai Longfangs are making their way up as well. And this could be a real problem for them, honestly, if they surrender the high ground. You can see some Hishbukraz Howlers, some more of them are on the way, more Scarahai Longfangs, so Windy definitely sees an opportunity here to take a position, and he's very right to think that. Scarahai Trappers are over here. Let's go and see what's happening in the middle. Waffles has definitely been he's been more cautious, I think. But the Archer Talath Dirnim able to shoot here. Scarahai Blood Drinkers charging in. Really, he hasn't been able to make any sort of headway. The Hishbukraz Howlers seem to have all died off. The Scarahai Blood Drinkers are also rapidly moving in the same direction. So that's unfortunate for them, but to be fair, against the Elven Pikes, the heavy Elven Spears, it was always going to be fairly difficult. In come the Scarahai Longfang, so all he can really do is continue to keep up the pressure over here and hope that his two allies can make something happen, which, to be fair, I think they have done a pretty decent job at. The House of Feanor have been stopped so far, but I feel as though eventually their heavy infantry should be enough, although I say that, Footmen of Amras running away, and it's clear to see why. The Arqueni Mormagilwa, one of the scariest units of infantry in the game at the moment, tearing through even the Footmen of Amras, and now this is a real problem for Feanor because their catapult is wide open. They're going to need support from some sort of infantry to help them out here. Do they have it though? I'm not certain they do. And the loss of a catapult without it doing anything will be a big loss for Feanor. Now, the catapult crew is capable of defending itself, and Elven artillery crew in particular, of course. You know, it's effectively Elven line infantry. But they're going to try and run away, and they will just about be able to get out of there. I mean, the Arqueni Mormagilwa probably shouldn't chase them too far, otherwise the Feanor archers will be able to shoot them down. But at the very least, they've managed to force away. And to be fair, they could just stay here. They could just stay here behind the cliff, and if the artillery crew attempts to remount, the catapults are far too close to the defending infantry. So they may not have killed off the crew, but they've still certainly made it far more difficult for the crew to remount their pieces. Archers of Amrod and Stalkers of Targaryen, two ranged units now in melee trying to push their way through, but still the Finarfin line holds strong. In come some poison arrows from the scouts of Tauror and Faroth. But this is a little bit more of an all-out assault list from the House of Feanor now. We have both units of Defenders of Aglon, we have the Otto and Maitimo, as well as more shield bearers of Helavorn moving in, so this is going to require a bit more of a response from the House of Finarfin. Time will tell if it's going to work out. I mean, in particular over here, the Dominion army, now they're sending forward some of their heavier units. You can see the Gijak Scarah's Wolfguard arriving at the back over there. Also, the Hishbukraz Ash Priests managing to throw their fiery projectiles into the archers of Talath Dirnim. So, Finarfin under a good amount of pressure at this point. Split shot arrows still doing their thing. The Sartor Finderato moving in. I mean, this is still not ideal for the Dominion army over here, because those split shot arrows are really going to do a number on them. But with all this support, they will at least be able to do something. I'm interested to see how Windy's assault up here on this hill is going, to be honest with you, because there was a lot of reinforcements sent over here. The Scouts of Galleon still fighting resolutely against the Scarahai Longfangs, and now also the Scarahai Blood Drinkers are on the front line as well. More Longfangs. The Hishbukraz Howlers are still down here. Obviously their locked morale keeping them in melee for as long as is necessary. More Blood Drinkers as well, so I think some Spear host of Galleon have revealed themselves. Obviously the two-handed spears trying to help hold the line, but just through sheer numbers here, I think the Dominion army is going to be able to put the necessary pressure on the defensive positions. Credit to Windy as well, because I do think he had the most difficult avenue of attack here, and now he's also pushing through the middle. The Gijak Scarah's Wolfguard able to move into the Spear host of Rathloriel, so the Scarahai Trappers obviously managing to deplete the Spear host of Rathloriel before the infantry moved in to join the assault. Scouts of Galleon that are out of ammunition joining the front line, and this is where Assyrian can come undone. If you bring too many archers as Assyrian, even though, you know, Elven archers are obviously going to be able to look after themselves in melee, it's still not quite the same thing as having a contingent of dedicated heavy infantry to do this sort of work for you. And it could be where the Dominion reap some of the benefits of their particular composition, bringing some Wolf Guards and Chosen. The Hishbuk-Raz Howlers are moving forward in numbers now as well. Obviously, locked morale means that Assyrian are not going to be able to rely on breaking the entirety of this Orcish army, and obviously the Gijak Skaraz being slightly higher tier units is going to be more difficult to break anyway. We also have more Scarahai. The Scarahai Trappers have taken a lot of damage, to be fair, from the Elven Archers, but I don't know, it's going to be Mythern and Tolgalen, probably needed against all these Gijak Skaraz at this point. Erfinen Tower as well. The Randirim are in a perfect position, to be honest with you. They should be shooting right through this infantry position, because I feel as though Assyrian haven't done a good enough job at punishing Windy for being so aggressive. So I would say that, as much as I'm giving credit to Windy for being as aggressive as he is and making it stick, I feel as though Assyrian had every opportunity and had the tools to punish them for that. But as it is, they didn't really do that. And now you can see the Dominion starting to push through. A gap appearing, the Sartorf Inderato still holding on, but the Gijak Skaraz Wolfguard trying to wrap up the line. There's still some Spear Host of Wrath L'Oreal fighting in the middle. The Marksman of Nargothrond moving in to prevent the Scarahai Longfangs from getting any further into the settlement. Time will tell how much longevity that actually has, though, because still the Hishbuk-Raz Ash Priests using their fiery projectiles to good effect. In comes the rest, really, of Waffles' army, more Scarahai Longfangs and Blood Drinkers to add into that. Still over here, you can see that the Defenders of Aglon, the more elite units for the House of Feanor now charging in, putting some real pressure onto the defensive line. The Scouts using their poison arrows to try and turn the tide in this battle, and they could. After a certain amount of casualties are sustained, those poison arrows could be the difference, and they could send the House of Feanor's army routing. And to be fair, the House of FINARFIN is still doing a very good job over here, I'd have to say, against the House of Feanor. What's going on up here on the hill? This was where the Arqueni Mormagilwar were, and here they are. The Footmen of Amras getting absolutely destroyed by them, as you would expect. Like, it's going to take something like the Ottorn to deal with them. The Catapult is here. They have remounted. Point-blank shots, but not really anything too devastating there, and to be honest with you, I think the Catapult's days are very much numbered. The Arqueni should probably get into the Catapult crew now and start ripping them apart. Defenders of Talath-Din are up here. So yeah, against the House of Feanor, actually, the Defenders look as though they're going to win this fight, albeit quite narrowly. The Ottorn and the Defenders of Aglon will certainly take their toll. But elsewhere, it's looking pretty dicey for the Defenders at this point. The numbers of the Orcs are starting to flood in. Gijak Skaraz Chosen, fresh to the fight, going to be very difficult to get rid of with their heavier armour and shields. In come the Archers of Talath-Din, and that's really like it's like trying to put a band-aid on a leg that's been blown off at this point. Because the Archers, the Marksmen of Nargothrond, trying to do something, but Waffles, in the end, his patience did pay off. But I feel as though a large part of what's really helping the attackers here is just that I think Assyrian misjudged how to deal with Windy's army over here. Because by all rights, Windy should not be winning these fights over here. And indeed, with the Ents moving in, the Gijak Skaraz Wolfguard are routing, as are the Gijak Skaraz Chosen. Like, Windy may still lose this fight, but he's done far better than he had any right to over here, and I do feel as though a big part of that is down to Assyrian not really being set up correctly. Erfin N Tower over here, Randirim N Tolgalen. Assyrian can still turn this fight around, though. You can see that they very quickly managed to turn this fight in their favour, the Mythern and Tolgalen, as well as the Ents. You can see over here the Hishbuk-Raz Ash Priests moving in, charging into the Randirim, a very big tool that the defenders have at their disposal, the Randirim, so if they get caught up on the Ash Priests for too long, that could be a real problem for them. Interestingly enough, the Ash Priests in melee, probably one of the better units for trying to deal with the Ents as well, with those nasty axes they have. Over here, this should be where Windy's army is still winning. The Hunters of Wrath L'Oreal, to be fair, doing a very good job at holding the line so far, and it does go to show that a lot of these Scarahai units, they're a little bit more focused around base attack and AP, rather than their own survivability, which against the higher melee defense of someone like the Elves of Assyrian, that can be a real issue, because they really, like, you'd expect a situation like this to go quite heavily in favour of the attackers once it's started, but just based on the kind of units that are involved here, Assyrian have been able to fight for a long time and do quite a good job, to be honest with you. Hishbuk-Raz Hunters are over here, but I will still give credit to Windy for what he's done over here, but ultimately it does look as though he's going to lose as well. So it may end up being just Waffles' Dominion army going up against the dregs of Assyrian and the House of FINARFIN. Very quickly this battle is going to start to reach a conclusion, I think. The Ishbuk-Raz Ash Priests are now being set upon by the Ents and more Spear Host, and their low numbers here are going to be their problem. Like, they are intended more as a supporting unit, like they're not a powerhouse in their own right, in quite the same way as the Ents, so that's still going to be an issue. And the Ents are actually heading over to try and get into that large Dominion blob, although with all the Scarahai Blood Drinkers over there, that might not be the best of ideas. Gijak Scarah's Wolfguard have returned from routing, and the Scouts of Gellion doing the business. With the support of the Earth and Tower, the Mythern and Tol Galen still doing their thing as well. Yeah, and over here, the archer support from those poison archers up on the walls has been absolutely vital here against the House of Feanor. And I think the House of FINARFIN, while they have lost fairly substantially here in the middle against this central Dominion army of Waffles, I think if they were going to choose one army to focus in on, they did the right thing by going after the House of Feanor. Because if the House of Feanor got into the settlement, it would have been very difficult to get rid of them with their quality and with their armour. Whereas as it is, with the Green Elves of Assyrian now sending over more and more support, I'm not sure whether the Dominion of Tol and Gawroth have what it takes to really make this stick. We'll see. I mean, the Ash Priests are up here with the support of the Gijak Scaraz chosen. They should be able to finish off this unit of Earthen Tower. Down here, there's still the Sartor Finderato, so this unit of Elven Spears is proving really difficult to get rid of. And this is the issue, like, the Dominion have technically won over here, but they're having a real problem finishing off the units that were over here, and now more and more reinforcements are starting to filter across. The Scouts of Tower and Faroth are moving across as well, so you can see that all of these units that were over there shooting at the House of Feanor are now coming over here as makeshift infantry to help finish off the Dominion armies, and I think that is what is making the difference here. The Orc Mangonel is now firing, but the Mangonel is such an unreliable thing. It can be devastating, but more often than not, it's just there for the light show, really. Now the Gijak Scaras chosen, surrounded by Earthen Tower and Mythern and Tol Galen. These heavy Orc Spears are not going to be a match for them. There are still these Laug Skaraz Zagulaklab, who will be able to get some decent charges off, but I'm not sure whether one unit of Wargs will be enough. And I think that might be it. Yeah, the Ultorna are routing, so the House of Feanor stopped dead in its tracks by the House of FINARFIN, and I think Aguilar deserves quite a lot of credit for that, because it wasn't his entire army even that was over here facing off against them, and still he was able to stop the House of Feanor's march. So good performance there from Aguilar. King of the North will probably be slightly disappointed that he wasn't able to force his way into the settlement, considering it wasn't the entire army of FINARFIN that he was facing off against, but there is still the quality discrepancy of being an attacking army against the defending one that you can always fall back on. But certainly I think Windy can afford to be fairly pleased with his day's work, considering the gauntlet that was laid out for him. He still has these units over here, which should be enough, honestly, to face off against the Ents, but he won't have enough left to actually turn this battle back around in favour of the attackers. But yeah, I feel as though there are several ways into this settlement, but it is still a pretty decent settlement to defend. There's basically 2 choke points on either side and then just the one in the middle, so there's 5 ways in. Waffles only had the one that he could really go into. He took a lot of losses from those split shot arrows, as you would expect. But I can't help but feel as though if Waffles had been far more aggressive, rather than sort of drip feeding in those units into the front line, he would have maybe had a little bit more. Maybe get those Gijak Scaras chosen in earlier, put them into shield wall and try and push through, because the FINARFIN army over here was a skeleton crew, to be honest with you. Most of, at least the lion's share of Aguilar's strength was spent stopping the House of Feanor dead in their tracks. I feel as though the only real threat over here was the Sartor Finderato, and that's still a small unit. So I feel as though Waffles will probably reflect upon this battle and think that he should have been a little bit more aggressive, because then he could have forced his way in sooner, and then panic can start to set in, because then the defenders are going to have to start sending reinforcements over, which will of course give the 2 armies on the flanks much more of an opportunity to get in there and start doing their thing. The Gijak Scaras chosen are fighting hard, of course, as you would expect from the heavier units of the Orcs, but here we can see. And to be fair, I think Assyrian could have handled their situation a little bit better. I feel as though Windy got further than he probably should have against the defence that was laid on for him. But as soon as the Mythern and Tol Galen and Ents joined the front line, the Dominion army and the choke point started to suffer a lot. And in the end, they just didn't have the quality over on the hill to win that battle quickly enough. It was all Scarahai, Longfangs and Blood Drinkers, really. Which, while okay, you know, they weren't able to win the fight quickly enough to really make some pressure on the flanks. But still, a good effort from him, I would say. And the attackers didn't really do too much wrong in this particular fight, I don't think. Fëanor will probably be slightly disappointed that they wandered right into the Elven crossfire that was set up on the walls, and Waffles will probably be a little bit disappointed he wasn't as aggressive as he could have been, but relatively minor things, to be honest with you. I do think the defenders, in particular, I think Aguilar deserves a lot of credit for how he handled things. He had to ration his army between 2 choke points, and he did a very good job at that. He split his army sort of perfectly for the situation, really. Mythern and Tol Galen still in here. The Hishbukras Ash Priests still doing their thing with their huge axes. A unit of 2-handed shock infantry that still has a shield value from the front. Almost Huskar-esque the way that they're using those shields and large axes. It's not going to be enough to save them here, though, against the Elven infantry they're facing off against. Meanwhile, that's pretty much going to be the end, I think, for the Dominion of Tol and Gawrahoth over on this side. Windy's army is pretty much gone. The Hishbukras Howlers are, of course, locked morale, so they will stand and fight against the Urfin Entawa and the Ents until the bitter end. But the Scarahai units have no such locked morale, and they're, of course, running for the hills. As soon as those Ents got the support from those heavy Elven Axemen, it was always going to be a big problem for them. Meanwhile, some of these Orcs routing further into the settlement, which seems ill-advised, when the Arqueni Morma Gilwa are over here with their black swords. Some defenders of Talathiad in here as well, so yeah, I think a deserved victory for the defenders here, just because of the performance from the House of FINARFIN here. Really, really good performance from them, and you know, maybe it shouldn't be too surprising. I mean, they definitely don't have the heavier infantry that the House of Fëanor do, but they're still no slouches there. They definitely have a very strong infantry corps, especially when it comes to their more defensive infantry, like their spears and their pikes. Units like the Sartor Finderato over here. So they're pretty good at holding the line. And then, of course, their archers as well. Elven archers are always going to be good, but in this situation, they had poison arrows, which were very useful against the House of Fëanor. They had split shot arrows, which were devastating against the Dominion of Tol and Gawrahoth. So yeah, and then Assyriand obviously did what they did against the Dominion as well. Maybe not quite as dominant as the FINARFIN performance here, but they still did okay. And to be fair, it's a name that I think I have seen Uraki or Uraki perform in battles before, but not too many, so I would presume that they're not as experienced as the other players on display here. Obviously, I've seen Aguilar several times at this point. He knows the deal, and a very good performance it was. Still, the Hishbukras Ash Priests and the Orc Mangonel crew not going down without a fight. The Gijak Skaras Chosen also up here on the hill. Another unit that's fairly difficult to get rid of, heavy spearmen. More units are going to be required, but fortunately more units are here. Bridge wards, scouts, marksmen. The Arqueni are still fairly far away, to be honest with you. I think Windy did admit defeat, so that's all his units just routing all over the place. Yeah, in the end, Windy, he did well, but he didn't actually get into the settlement too far. Like this was pretty much as far as he got up onto the walls with his Ash Priests. But I kind of expected that, considering the opposition he was up against. I feel as though it was up to Fëanor and the Central Dominion army to take advantage of a more split FINARFIN army, and they weren't really able to do that. And so in the end, the defenders managed to get a well-deserved win here. Hishbukras Ash Priest still alive, still inflicting more casualties on the defenders, but still relatively close. I mean, FINARFIN don't have much left, to be honest with you, which is what you'd expect from a battle like this. The Green Elves have got slightly more. They've still got some Ents, they've still got some Urfin Entawa and some Hunters, but I mean, not a huge amount. Close as you would expect, but there goes the Assyrian general as well. And there go the scouts as well from FINARFIN. Routing off, but yeah. Close, and in this sort of situation, you know, little things can pile up to make a big difference. And if the defenders make a mistake, it's often amplified, but they didn't really make a mistake in this situation. Assyrian could have been more dominant against the Dominion army on their side, as I said, but that wasn't really a mistake as such. And with the Ents in here now, that should be enough to make most of these units rout off. The Gijaxgaras Chosen still fighting hard, but they are wavering. The Bridge Wards of Nargothrond are obviously a huge advantage for the House of Finarfin to have in a situation like this as well. No other faction in the game at the moment has got any sort of dedicated pike unit in the way that they have, especially an upper end pike unit like the Bridge Wards are. So when they're on the defence, if you can't shoot them with ranged units, they can really prove to be a problem. You either need to push through them with high mass units like the Gijaxgaras Chosen in Shield Wall, or you need to try and shoot them, and in this situation they just weren't able to do that, the attackers. Here are the Arqueni Mormagilwa, who were another unit which made the House of Feanor's job very, very difficult. That fight up on the high ground went in Finarfin's favour, largely because of this unit, I would suggest. There was really nothing that the House of Feanor had up there which could go toe-to-toe with them. The Ottorn were down on the low ground and subject to all of the arrow fire, to be honest with you, so again, maybe miscalculations were made there. Credit to these Gijaxgaras Chosen for fighting as long as they did. The Hishbuk Raz Ash Priest, I think they're another unit which are lock morale, to be honest with you, because they're in here. The General is still fighting hard, but in the end, this is the sum total of all the defenders now. Significantly lower force in terms of numbers than they were at the start, but a good victory here for them, I would have to say. Well defended this settlement was. There are the Ents just ploughing through those elves in the background there. It's just Azog, who I'm sure is a placeholder for now, but there he goes. And there we go. A good victory there. And it's possible that he still has a unit. Yeah, actually Windy didn't admit defeat. He's still over here with his Hishbuk Raz Howlers. But they're going to all die off the charge, to be honest with you, especially with the Arqueni Mormagilwa in the vanguard. They're going to instantly evaporate the Hishbuk Raz Howlers. Look at that, only one of them survived the charge, and that was because he was behind all his buddies, and then he immediately gets stabbed. There we go. Yeah, good victory, I have to say. And I think this is a good showcase, honestly, of what the House of Finarfin are really quite good at. When they're defending in a settlement, of course, they can always elven factions can always rely on having a very good skirmish line, and certainly the House of Finarfin are no exception there. They have split shot arrows, which is obviously a very big boon. They have a unit that has poison arrows, and of course, even their more basic archer and the archers of Talath Dirna are still very capable. But among the elven factions, they have a focus around their spears, and obviously that pike unit as well. So spears, pikes, polearms of all descriptions of what they can do. Obviously the Arqueni Mormagilwa are a fantastic unit of heavy swordsmen as well, but that's more of an outlier, to be honest with you, as far as the General's Bodyguard unit goes. But yeah, in terms of defending a settlement like this, I feel as though when you build their army correctly, they can be very, very difficult to break down. And I feel as though, in particular, actually, the House of Feanor's army learnt that very harsh lesson, because only 743 kills from them. On paper, of all of the attacking armies, they were probably the scariest because of their heavy armour, because of their quality, but in the end they were made to look quite average by the House of Finarfin in this case, and part of that has to do with how well Agalar played, but also part of it has to do with the focus that the House of Finarfin has, and obviously the defensive position they occupy. The Dominion in this situation are going to be a little bit more difficult to use, I feel like, because in comparison to Angband at the very least, because of their lighter armour, because of their sort of, again, their focus around attack, you know, armor piercing, which can be very useful against the right factions. But in particular, I think Windy had the deck stacked against him purely because he was going up against the Elves of Assyriand, which in terms of faction against faction, I feel as though Assyriand have a bit of an advantage over the Dominion of Tol and Gowerhoth just in general. And I think he did very well, to be honest with you, all things considered. But he was always going to be a bit of a sacrificial lamb in this case, I think. I feel as though Waffles will probably look back on this thinking he should have been a little bit more aggressive early on. Try and push through the skeleton crew that Finarfin had left here in the middle choke point. It would have been costly, but it was costly anyway, to be honest with you. Like, I feel as though he wouldn't have lost a great deal more if he pushed through earlier, and that would have solicited a response from somewhere else. It would have ultimately ended in Waffles' doom, I think, but it would have given the Feanor army on the right and Windy's army on the left a little bit more breathing space to maybe go on and win the battle. As it was, didn't really commit enough for me, and obviously Feanor as well, like, probably be disappointed with the performance they put in purely because you expect more from the House of Feanor in this sort of situation. Like, yes, Finarfin have got a good focus around this sort of thing, but you'd still expect a little bit more from some of the more heavily armoured legions in the game at the moment. But still, I feel as though it was less the attackers doing stuff drastically wrong and more just the fact that the defenders built their armies correctly and did the right things. The House of FINARFIN especially, I have to say. And let's see what did the damage for them. They were just shy of 4,000 kills, so you can see here a lot of good work done. Over 200 kills on the Arqueni, over 250 on the Sartor Finderato in the middle, so it goes to show how well they did against the Dominion onslaught. The archers of all sorts obviously did very well. That unit of marksmen of Nargothrond was almost certainly the one that was shooting into the Dominion blob, getting over 440 kills there. Over 450 kills on the bridge wards of Nargothrond, so again, the pikes proving to be a very big factor in this battle. As you would expect on the defence, they're such a big threat. The Wardens of Nargothrond as well. Which one of these are the... one of these... Actually, that's the spears, isn't it? The Wardens of Nargothrond. So just a unit of sort of heavier spears getting over 500 kills. And I would imagine that was against the Dominion army. I can't imagine those 500 kills came against stuff like Footmen of Amras and Defenders of Aglon. I would imagine it came against sort of Scarahai Blood Drinkers and the like, Scarahai Longfangs as well. The Swordsmen doing very, very well also. Good performance from them. And these units down here just getting 100 kills each. But the Scouts of Tower and Faroth getting 150. But the Poison Arrows were ultimately the final nail in the coffin for the House of Feanor in this case, by making them rout just a little bit sooner than they would have. And that could have made the difference, honestly. I feel as though even without that, they probably still would have won, but it would have been far more dicey. In the end, though, a very, very good performance, I have to say, from the House of FINARFIN. And to be fair as well, in spite of the fact that I feel as though Assyrian should have maybe put the Dominion army of Windy to bed a little bit more easily than they should have, they still did a very fine job, to be honest with you. When sort of it was looking like the Dominion were actually going to break through, they did commit stuff like their Mythern, Entol Galen and their Ents, and sort of slapped the Dominion back down and said, no, you're not getting through here. And they did ultimately end up sending reinforcements to the middle as well, which is good, because I was worried just based on how they set up that the Elves of Assyrian would adopt an I'm alright Jack, I'm okay kind of mentality and just defend their own choke points and left the House of FINARFIN to their fate, but they didn't in the end. They did send over reinforcements, which is good to see. A bit of battlefield awareness there, which will always go a long way in a fight like this. But yeah, big thank you to Agalar for sending this one in. It's always good to see more of Silmarillion Total War. Now that the open alpha is out, I expect to be covering it a lot more than I have been in the past, obviously, because obviously it's been in development and I've just been sort of getting little drips and drabs, playing in a couple of battles here and there. Well, one battle actually I only played in before the open alpha was out, but now hopefully we'll start to see a little bit more of Silmarillion Total War, because it's something a little bit different, and certainly some good work has been done on it so far, and long may that continue. So yeah, big thank you to all the players involved. I hope Windy actually doesn't cover this himself, which actually I've just had the thought that maybe he will, but again, like I've said in the past, if someone sends me something, I'm going to cover it. Like, I really don't have the ability to sort of dance on eggshells, as it were, to try and sort of make sure that I'm not doing the same battle as someone else. Like, if someone sends it to me, I'm going to do it. Like, that's really all there is to it at this point, because I can't be bothered to sort of play this fun and games of trying to sort of determine who's doing what. So it's going to be done. I hope that Windy wasn't going to cover this, but if he does, personally I'm not all that concerned. Like, it'll be good to get the opinion of someone who was in this game and see maybe if it lines up with my own. But regardless, big thanks to all the players involved, especially thank you to Agalar Galudathon, obviously, for sending me this battle replay. Next, it will probably be a return to Reforged, I think. I've got a couple of battles in Reforged that I want to do. Again, this, I think, as well, will be the last battle that I do of 2019. So when we see another battle, it will be in the new year. So yeah, I hope you enjoyed this, and I hope you'll join me for whatever is next.